Yeah. So it's interesting in that El Salvador does not have its own currency. So up until recently, they were using the U.S. dollar as their currency, and then the president, one of his policy initiatives was to make Bitcoin the legal tender of the country. And obviously, Bitcoin, as much as I'm a fan of Bitcoin and have some investments in it, um, one of those things that's highly speculative and highly risky. And so, we are probably about 15 or so years into the Bitcoin journey, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. But, it's still in its early stages, and to make such a drastic change may not have been the wisest decision of them all.
Yeah, so in June of 2021, the president said, like, we're going full force and we're going to push to make it legal tender. And if you read different reports, I read one in Slate that meant 90 days to sort of set up the infrastructure, which included the country's own Bitcoin wallet, installing Bitcoin ATMs, and then selling the population on the idea of using Bitcoin as their form of currency. There were reports, this came from Tribune magazine, that he originally invested over $10 million of government money into Bitcoin. And then just recently in early May, he bought the dip and he added $15.5 million worth of Bitcoin to the country's balance sheet. In September, it became legal tender. He passed a bill, the president passed a bill to make it legal tender. And since that point, it's lost quite a bit of value, like 37%. That is not somebody who sounds risk averse. That's for sure. Sort of buying the dip and adding, sort of doubling down on this Bitcoin investment.
Yeah, and a change like that requires a lot of work. Obviously you need to educate people about making the switch. Your financial institutions need to be able to do that. Your retailers need to be able to do that. Setting up, setting up wallets. All of that requires, and a big component of that is the educational component. What does this mean for the people in the way that they transact, right? No longer using paper money, but now using a digital currency to pay for goods and services. And I think the intentions may have been good. There are instances where people, for example, even in the United States, where people have issues accessing banks, either because of credit issues, maybe they bounced a bunch of checks, and they're on the bad list, if you will, and are unable to open accounts. Maybe if they live in sort of hard to reach areas, where the closest bank might be 10, 12, 13, 14 miles away from them. And so, Bitcoin solves that problem, right? Because you can now set up a wallet. You don't really need, anybody can buy it, anybody can sell it, anybody can transfer it. It may be risky, for sure, but it sort of helps those people who are sometimes left behind by the traditional financial systems. But the issues that it solves, um, having access to Bitcoin, there are certain segment of the population that, despite those best intentions, you are not going to be able to get on the Bitcoin train, or I should, perhaps say, the perhaps on the perhaps on the Bitcoin uh, blockchain, right? I mean, there going to be a few people who, either because of age or because they're not tech savvy, or because they don't have access to tech, right? I mean, there are places, even in upstate New York, where I frequently travel to, that are, not reached by 5G and broadband. My partner Katie, for example, um, she has about a 10-mile commute from where she works to where she lives, and about half of that 10-mile commute doesn't have any cell service, right? So if you had any retailers that fall in that 5, 6 mile radius, they wouldn't be able to take Bitcoin, right? Because you need to have access to cell service. And if you look at her parents still have a flip phone, right? And so right. And so you need access to a smartphone, and her parents are pretty smart, but she is their go-to tech person, right? As I am in my family for my parents. And so, there are some of those issues that perhaps may not have been thought of. And if those issues exist in a developed country, like the United States, those issues probably are more exaggerated and probably exist to a higher degree in a developing nation like El Salvador. And so while the intentions may have been good, it may not have been thought through. And so the more time that you plan, the better it could have been. And now you're in this sticky situation where inflation is high. Inflation is high not only in the United States, but uh, in all over the globe. It is high. And sometimes countries that have their own currency, the way they get out of sticky situations is by printing more money. And in the case of El Salvador, that's not an option,